The ISFP is an interesting one, not quite as popular as the mistype giants such as INFJ and INTJ, but mistyping into introverted feeling dominant is a fairly easy mistake to make. So I'm going to be giving you 5 signs to consider why you may not be an ISFP. Let's jump into it. Sign number 1, introverted feeling dominance. So just like with the ISFP spends the majority of their time submerged within the waters of the limbic system. And this can almost equate to complete emotional acceptance, not in the sense of not having a priority of what emotion is preferable to another one, of course, but being willing to look the emotion in the eye in the first place, rather than denying its existence or replacing it with their introverted thinking narrative. And also like with the INFP, owing to the convergent attitude of this function, the INFP tends to happen to their emotions more than their emotions happen to them. The implications of being an introverted feeling dominant is not necessarily having a strong introverted feeling, or even a sovereign one, or even making the majority of your decisions based upon feelings alone. Actually, ISFPs in particular can have a heck of a TISI dip, and can often mistype as TI dominance. This isn't helped by the more neutral feeling of FiNi, which we're going to be getting into later in this video. No, to be an FI dominant is to spend the majority of your cognitive time submerged within introverted feeling and consciously shaping its direction. Whereas INTJs, the same functions just in different order, tend to gaze more calmly upon a more locked-in introverted feeling. The introverted feeling of an ISFP tends to be much more of a constant churn. So if you find your feelings tend to happen to you and can even feel more like an invisible hands on your back pushing you forward, which can even manifest sometimes as impulsive behavior, for example, it is more likely you're an introverted feeling divergent than convergent. Furthermore, if you take a little control and ownership over your feelings and identity, and feel your sense of character is not egoistically directed, it is less likely you are this type. Sign number 2 that you are not an ISFP, the extroverted thinking, oppositional. So having extroverted thinking in oppositional position does not necessarily mean impaired executive function across the board, but it does imply a lack of convergent use of this function. In essence, the ISFP has a hard time being practical for the sake of being practical. However, once an ISFP is locked into their vision, their extroverted thinking can actually become a force to be reckoned with, which is why it's generally a bad idea to just slap the label inferior upon it. But the true nature of oppositional extroverted thinking lies in the way it observes the world more than interacts with it. In the ISFP's case, with extroverted thinking paired to extroverted sensing after all, the ISFP can quite easily become a connoisseur of exquisite experiences and refined aesthetic principle. This isn't because SE equates to sensory indulgence, of course, it's simply because of the specific and refined nature of external perception that goes with it, rather than being a tool to employ at the behest of introverted feeling, such as with a extroverted thinking convergent type, such as an ESFP or ENTJ. The ISFP uses extroverted thinking as an experiential conduit to assess the potentiality of what they observe and what it can become. If you tend to enjoy planning an organization for its own sake, even taking everyday executive function in your stride without needing a kind of fire burning inside you in order to ignite the necessary energies towards it, it is less likely you are an ISFP. Sign number 3 that you are not an ISFP, the SE authority function. So this leads us into the authoritative nature of extroverted sensing within this type. As opposed to the ESFP, the ISFP tends not to throw themselves at life, as much as they do remain receptive to its emerging experiential possibilities. And yes, I do use the word possibilities here. Possibilities is not the sole domain of extroverted intuition. This is why so many ISFPs tend to mistype as INTPs and ENTPs. Well, one of the reasons anyway. So being a divergent function, the extroverted sensing of an ISFP is much less of an interactive focal point. And outside of their comfort zone, the ISFP can actually be extraordinarily shy and unreceptive to what they have not yet previously experienced. And again, we're talking about stereotypes here, because being shy in regards to what you have not yet previously validated and experienced is not just an introverted sensing thing. Very often the ISFP prefers to experience from a distance. And while their sensory threshold does tend to be above average, actually taking the reins over their experience tends to be more of a growth point for this type. And less developed ISFPs may find themselves relying more upon other people to hand them experiences. More often, the ISFP is a starry-eyed idealist, spending more time imagining what is possible than diving headlong into life to make the impossible possible. Extroverted sensing here serves more as a source of inspirational fuel. And the higher the quality of the experience, going back to the whole connoisseur thing, and the more extroverted thinking potential that comes with this experience, the greater the rush the ISFP will enjoy. And it is this very rush that fuels the ISFP's FiNi transformations. If you seldom experience or even crave such strong rushes of inspiration and the flowing transformative energies that tend to come with them, it is less likely you are an ISFP. Furthermore, if you struggle to really lock into life's meaningful moments and can feel more locked outside of experience than trapped within it, an SE authority is less likely. So that leads us to sign number 4 that you are not an ISFP. Introverted feeling, introverted intuitive convergence. So now we can get into what I believe to be the most important, yet also the most misunderstood aspect of ISFP cognition, self-transformation. Introverted feeling paired more to introverted intuition here than introverted sensing. The landscape of the ISFP's feeling is much more holistic and more driven towards a kind of narrative encapsulation than the refined microprocessing of the INFP. So with NI pushing a more conclusive tendency for introverted feeling, it is therefore more common for ISFPs to experience great rushes of emotions and even favouring the extremes of emotional experience over the calmer centre. Actually, absent such extremities, the ISFP may even find the nature of their introverted feeling much cooler than the experience of the INFP. So cool, in fact, that ISFPs could have a very difficult time seeing introverted feeling anywhere. And this is because the definitions of introverted feeling tend to be biased towards FISI rather than FINI. Rather than going really deep, as in the case of SI, it is essentially spreading energies across a wider surface area in order to encapsulate as much as possible. Imagine butter spread over too much bread. It is for this very reason that the ISFP tends to mistype as ENTP and INTP. They mistake the relative coolness of their natural limbic landscape for the detached rationalization of a TI compulsive type. In fact, the introverted feeling of this type can be so expansive that absent a kind of anchor, they can end up feeling lost within its waters. And this, alongside the everything at once perspective of introverted intuition, leads the ISFP to often embody a kind of archetype, or even employ several archetypes within their internal world, such as even fictional characters, to serve as kind of advisors. Furthermore, as introverted intuition tends to enforce a level of internal cohesion, there are certain levels of emotional nuance that can become lost to this type. Sometimes the world is either for one or against one. One either loves a person, hates a person, or is indifferent to them. And ISFPs can sometimes even become confused by their rapidly undulating emotions, sometimes thinking the world of a person, and then other times feeling nothing at all. And such swings, while of course not representative of every ISFP, tend to be the product of introverted intuition's desire to jump to a kind of holistic conclusion, and thusly allowing two conflicting emotions to exist at the same time can be a challenge for this type. Emotional ambiguity, not so much. But it is this very NI conclusivity that gives this type their incredible ability to embody a kind of archetype. They can often be natural actors, for example. It is not that difficult for FINI to get into a character and fully embody all that character represents. And heck, more mischievous ISFPs can even use this ability to mess with people. And so if such innate acting ability sounds foreign to you, FINI dominance is less likely. If you find your identity to be something more innate, experience the identity formation process as more of a ongoing excavation of something that has always been, more than a gradual building process towards something entirely new, it is less likely you are an FINI dominant. You may want to consider FISI dominance as an alternative. Sign number 5 that you are not an ISFP, the introverted intuitive agency function. And the ultimate embodiment of all for this type is in their own vision of self-realization, a kind of future self they not only aspire to become, but actively borrow from into the present. It is not unusual for this type to borrow from their future self, and in the process kind of present to themselves and other people an ideal they are striving towards. And with the sometimes natural impatience of the extroverted sensing authority. The sooner this is realized, the better. Less healthy ISFPs can even get their present and future versions of themselves crossed, placing extraordinarily high expectations on themselves to embody a character they have yet to become. And this can even lead to a destructive cycle of feeling misunderstood or even victimized by other people, simultaneously suffering a harsh internal critic, beating themselves up for failing to live up to their own expectations. And thus a level of self-acceptance is paramount for this type. FiNi often demands self-excellence, and living up to that future vision while simultaneously loving and accepting the present self can be a challenge for this type. However, when this equilibrium is achieved, the FiNi of this type can be a force to be reckoned with. Once the singular vision of Ni here is really locked in, this can lead to a tremendous amount of willpower and single-minded determination. And owing also to the exacting nature of the TeSe opposing pairing, the type who is able to make their necessary sacrifices in order to see their dreams become reality, even at the expense of, say, everyday pleasures. This is a type that should come to mind. You see, the agency function is the cognitive focal point we kind of double down on at the expense of its opposing orientation. In this case, extroverted intuition. And if you were unexacting in your expectations, seldom given to idealization, and rarely knowing what outcome you would prefer over another one, introverted intuition in agency position is pretty unlikely. Bonus point, the extroverted thinking, extroverted intuitive blind spot. The reason ISFPs can be so single-minded and idealistic lies in the effective rejection of TeNe. If extroverted intuition was not a blind spot here, the ISFP may find themselves erring off course without even realizing it. As it stands, the ISFP essentially shuts out TeNe in order to stick to the chosen lane. All TE energies are instead directed towards TeSe, which can cause a kind of bulldozer effect, pushing decidedly in a linear direction. However, this very single-minded determination can come with it a certain tunnel vision. It has to be a certain way, and should it be anything other than the outcome the ISFP was idealizing, this could actually be experienced by the psyche as a kind of failure. Many is the ISFP who is so exacting in what they want that they become a kind of one-person army, learning multiple skill sets across multiple different areas, so that they can see a vision realized in such a way that can only occur when they have complete and total control over the process. TeNe collaboration is much more of a growth point for this type. But absent such growth, the ISFP may find themselves taking far too much upon their own shoulders, forgetting that they are merely human, and in the process burning out. Or worse yet, become locked into a spiral of disappointment, when despite all of their tremendous, prodigious even TeSe efforts, reality fails to live up to their high expectations. If you find yourself instead a happy collaborator, loving nothing more than to embed yourself within a lively TeNe ecosystem, it is less likely you are an ISFP. So that concludes the video. This has been a little bit of a shorter one. I'm still trying to get the hang of making slightly shorter and more compact videos. So I hope this was informative. And if you know any mistyped ISFPs, be sure to direct them to this video. There is no shame in getting your type wrong. It tends to be an ongoing process of exploration, and even those who know their type are always in the process of rediscovering it. If after watching this video you're still curious about what your type might be, I do offer typing services, as does my friend Rob, and you can find more information about this on cognitivepersonality.com. If you're interested in supporting the channel in a theory and additional level, you can also find me on Patreon. And if you would like to learn more about the fundamentals of CPT, which is a system distinct from MBTI, although overlapping with it in many ways, I do recommend checking out the CPT ebook. So that's it for me, and I will be back in a few weeks' time. For now, take care.